Get that trash can out of my sight." The voice was loud enough to make several people inside the executive lounge turn their heads at the same time. Vanessa Carter stopped beside her cleaning cart and slowly looked up, expecting another traveler asking for directions or another passenger complaining about something minor. But the expression on the man's face told her immediately that this wasn't about the cart, and it certainly wasn't about the trash. Sitting near the floor-to-ceiling windows with 3 Korean investors and 2 business partners was William Harrison, a billionaire real estate developer who had spent the last 6 months trying to secure one of the biggest deals of his career. He adjusted the sleeve of his expensive suit, glanced toward the guests sitting across from him, and then back at Vanessa with the kind of smile that made people uncomfortable. "I asked for professional service," he said, loudly enough for nearby travelers to hear. "Not some ghetto janitor blocking the view." The lounge didn't go silent, but conversations became quieter. A woman lowered her coffee cup without taking a sip. 2 men sitting near the bar exchanged awkward glances. One of the Korean associates slowly looked down at his plate. Nobody laughed, but William didn't seem to notice. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a $20 bill, and flicked it toward her. The bill landed on the polished floor between them. "Pick that up and bring me fresh coffee," he said with a chuckle. "I'm sure your mama taught you how to follow instructions." That sentence hit harder than the $20 lying on the floor, because Vanessa's mother had died when she was 7 years old. But William Harrison didn't know that, and judging by the smile on his face, he probably wouldn't have cared even if he did. Vanessa remained calm. She had dealt with rude travelers before. She had dealt with impatient people, arrogant people, angry people. But there was something about the way this man looked at her, the confidence with which he believed he could reduce another human being to nothing, that made several people around them visibly uncomfortable. "My mother taught me respect, sir," Vanessa replied quietly. William laughed and leaned back in his chair. "Respect," he repeated. "Sweetheart, you're pushing a trash cart. Let's not pretend you're curing cancer." One of the younger Korean associates shifted in his seat. "Mr. Kang's wife lowered her eyes and exchanged a glance with her husband, but neither of them said anything. William seemed pleased with himself. In his mind, the conversation was already over. Vanessa gave a small nod. "I'll leave, sir." "Good," William answered immediately. "That's probably the smartest thing you've done all night." Vanessa turned around and began walking toward the service hallway. 3 more steps and she would disappear through the door. 3 more steps and William Harrison would become nothing more than another rude customer she would eventually forget. 3 more steps and the entire night would continue exactly as everyone expected. But then she heard something. Mr. Kang had leaned slightly toward his wife and spoken softly in Korean. It wasn't loud. None of the other people at the table paid any attention to it, but Vanessa understood every word. "If he treats his own people like this, Mr. Kang said quietly, "How will he treat business partners?" His wife nodded gently. Vanessa stopped walking. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her cleaning cart, because she understood something William Harrison didn't. The man he had spent months trying to impress had already started losing respect for him. Vanessa closed her eyes for 1 second, and then slowly turned around. William noticed immediately. "Oh, she's back," he said with a smirk. "What happened? You forget your $20. But Vanessa wasn't looking at him. Instead, she looked directly at Mr. Kang, and then she spoke. In perfect Korean, "Mr. Kang, I apologize for the interruption," she said with a slight bow of her head. "I hope you're enjoying your evening. I believe the chef has prepared fresh salmon tonight, and I've heard it's excellent." Every person at the table froze. William blinked. Mr. Kang's eyebrows rose instantly. His wife slowly lifted her head. One of the associates nearly dropped his fork. And William Harrison, the man who had been talking nonstop for the last hour, suddenly became very quiet. "Mr. Kang stared at Vanessa for several seconds before a smile slowly appeared on his face. "You speak Korean beautifully," he answered in the same language. "Where did you study?" Vanessa smiled politely. "I didn't study, sir. I learned from people." Mr. Kang blinked in surprise. "You've never lived in Korea?" "No, sir." "You've never attended university there?" "No, Mr. Kang laughed not politely but genuinely. "That makes this even more impressive." William finally cleared his throat. Okay, very nice, he said with forced amusement. Cute trick. Very impressive. He looked at his guests and laughed, hoping someone would join him. Nobody did. Speaking a few sentences doesn't mean much, he continued. Anybody can memorize phrases. Vanessa finally turned toward him. Her voice remained calm. Would you like me to explain the concerns your guests have been discussing for the last 15 minutes, Mr. Harrison? William frowned. What, because they've raised 3 concerns about your proposal, Vanessa said, and I don't believe you've noticed any of them. Silence spread across the lounge, not ordinary silence. The kind where people stop eating without realizing it. The kind where the sound of ice moving inside a glass suddenly seems loud. William stared at her. Mr. Kang stared at her. Even William's business partners stopped moving. And for the first time that evening, William Harrison had absolutely nothing to say. Because the woman he had just humiliated in front of everyone had revealed something he never saw coming. She understood conversations he didn't even know were happening. And the night was only getting started. If you've ever been judged by your job instead of your character, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because what happened next inside that airport lounge left even William Harrison's closest business partner speechless. William Harrison forced a laugh and looked around the table, expecting someone, anyone, to join him. But the silence that greeted him was far more uncomfortable than he cared to admit. A few minutes earlier, he had been the center of attention. He had been the man with the money, the connections, and the deal everyone was waiting to celebrate. Now every eye inside that executive lounge seemed to be focused on a woman pushing a cleaning cart. Concerns, he repeated, keeping his smile in place. You're telling me my guests have concerns I somehow missed? Vanessa remained perfectly calm. She had no interest in embarrassing anyone, and she wasn't trying to prove anything. But she had heard what Mr. Kang and his associates had been discussing among themselves, and she knew enough about business culture to recognize hesitation when she heard it. Mr. Kang slowly leaned back in his chair with a curious expression. For the first time since arriving, he seemed genuinely interested. Please, Mr. Kang said in Korean, smiling warmly. Continue. Vanessa nodded respectfully and answered in the same language. She explained that the investors had concerns about the project's environmental permits, about the construction schedule being too aggressive, and about several smaller competitors who might challenge certain zoning agreements. She spoke carefully and naturally, translating not just the words but the meaning behind them. More importantly, she explained why Mr. Kang had avoided raising those issues directly with William. In Korean business culture, openly challenging someone in front of others could be seen as disrespectful. So instead, the investors had been discussing those concerns privately among themselves. The expressions around the table changed immediately. One associate slowly put down his fork. Another looked directly at Mr. Kang. William's business partner, Robert Mitchell, straightened in his chair, and Mr. Kang himself began smiling, not politely, not professionally, but with genuine surprise. She is correct, Mr. Kang said calmly in English. These are exactly the issues we have been discussing. William's smile disappeared. For several seconds, he simply stared at Vanessa. He had expected broken phrases, maybe a few memorized expressions. But this was something else entirely. This woman wasn't just speaking another language, she understood context. She understood culture, and judging by the expressions on his guests' faces, she understood them better than he did. Robert Mitchell turned toward William. She just summarized the conversation you've been trying to have all evening, he whispered. William ignored him. He leaned back and laughed again, but the confidence behind the sound had begun to fade. All right, he said. Very impressive, I'll give you that. But understanding dinner conversation and understanding business are 2 completely different things. Mr. Kang's wife glanced at her husband. The younger associate frowned. Robert lowered his eyes. Everyone at the table could feel it. William Harrison was no longer trying to understand Vanessa, he was trying to defeat her. Vanessa, however, didn't seem angry. If anything, she looked strangely relaxed. Years of being underestimated had taught her something important. People often reveal more about themselves when they feel threatened. And right now, William Harrison looked like a man whose pride had been wounded. Business is complicated, William continued, smiling again. Speaking a language socially is one thing. Understanding contracts and negotiations is another. Vanessa simply nodded. That's true, she said softly. The answer caught him off guard. He had expected an argument. Instead, she agreed with him. And somehow that irritated him even more. Robert Mitchell quietly rubbed his forehead. He had worked beside William for nearly 15 years, and he recognized that look immediately. The same expression William wore whenever things stopped going his way. The same expression that had cost him millions of dollars more than once. Because unlike most successful people, William Harrison had never learned how to lose gracefully. Nearby travelers had begun paying attention. A woman sitting near the windows had completely forgotten about the book in her hands. Two airline employees standing beside the coffee station had stopped talking. Even the bartender appeared unusually interested in the table near the center of the room. William suddenly reached for his phone. His fingers moved quickly across the screen before he turned it toward Vanessa. "Since you're obviously full of surprises," he said with another smile, "why don't we see how good you really are?" Robert immediately looked up. "William," he warned quietly, but William ignored him. On the screen was part of the proposal his legal team had prepared for the Korean investors. Dense language, technical wording, the sort of material that made most people uncomfortable. "Go ahead," William said. "Read it." Mr. Kang slowly raised an eyebrow. His wife looked uncomfortable. Robert Mitchell closed his eyes for a second. Because everyone at the table understood something William apparently didn't. He wasn't trying to learn anymore. He was trying to humiliate her. And sometimes, pride makes people forget who they're standing in front of. Vanessa looked at the phone in William Harrison's hand for a moment without reacting. The glow of the screen reflected softly on her face, but her expression stayed unchanged, as if she had already seen this moment coming long before it arrived. "Go ahead," William repeated, leaning back with forced calmness. "Read it, translate it. If you're as good as you claim, this should be easy for you." Robert Mitchell shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had seen William take risks before, but this felt different. This wasn't strategy anymore. It was pride pushing a man too far in front of the wrong audience. Mr. Kang said nothing. He simply watched Vanessa with quiet curiosity, as if waiting to see what kind of person she truly was beneath the uniform. Vanessa finally took the phone, not quickly, not nervously, but with a calmness that made even the smallest movement feel intentional. She scanned the document once, then again. The room didn't make a sound. William smirked slightly. "This is where it gets interesting," he said under his breath. But Vanessa didn't respond. Instead, she began speaking. Her voice was steady, controlled, clear. She translated the document line by line, explaining not just the words but the meaning behind them. She broke down financial clauses, zoning conditions, and liability structures in a way that made the entire proposal feel less like a complex legal document and more like a conversation someone should have already understood before presenting it. Robert stopped fidgeting. The younger Korean associate leaned forward slightly. Mr. Kang's expression became more serious. Even William's smile started to fade, because this wasn't memorization. This wasn't guesswork. This was understanding at a level that made the entire room uncomfortable. Vanessa paused briefly at one section, her eyes narrowing slightly as she read the legal phrasing again. Then she looked up. "This clause here," she said calmly, back in English now, "creates ambiguity around regional enforcement. In simpler terms, it can be interpreted two different ways depending on jurisdiction. One interpretation benefits your company, the other benefits your partners, but the wording does not clearly protect both sides equally." She placed the phone gently back on the table. "And that," she added softly, "is something your investors have already noticed." Silence. Mr. Kang slowly nodded. Then he looked at William. "She is correct," he said quietly. William didn't respond at first. His jaw tightened slightly. Robert finally exhaled. "William," he began carefully, but William raised his hand. "Enough," he said, sharper than intended. He leaned forward, trying to regain control of the moment. "Okay," he said, forcing a small laugh. "Let's not turn this into a performance. Reading a document doesn't make someone a professional." Vanessa looked at him, and for the first time that night, something in her expression changed. Not anger, not frustration. Something closer to clarity. "Then what would you call it?" she asked quietly. William didn't answer immediately, because deep down he knew the problem wasn't her anymore. It was the room. Everyone was watching her, not him, and he hated that. So he did what people like William often do when they feel control slipping away. He escalated. "You know what?" he said suddenly. "Let's settle this properly." Robert immediately shook his head. "I don't like where this is going." But William continued anyway. "I'll make you a deal," he said, pointing toward Vanessa. "If you're really as capable as you seem, prove it. A certified interpreter assessment. Live video, professional level, legal, medical, technical evaluation. If you pass, I'll write you a check for $100,000 in front of everyone here." A few people in the lounge turned at that, but William wasn't finished. "And if you don't pass," he added, lowering his voice slightly, "you admit this was a coincidence. You apologize to my guests and you leave this lounge quietly. No drama." Robert closed his eyes. "Mr. Kang frowned slightly, and Vanessa simply looked at William for a long moment. The kind of silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy because everyone understood what this really was now. It was no longer about language, it was about power. William leaned back, confident again. "Let's see if that's true," he said. Vanessa exhaled slowly, then she nodded once. "Okay," she said. Just one word, but it changed everything. And for the first time that night, William Harrison stopped smiling completely. The atmosphere inside the executive lounge had shifted into something far more intense, closer to a public test, where every person present understood that what was about to happen would not just decide one woman's reputation, but also expose the fragile confidence of a man who had never truly been questioned in his own world before. William Harrison leaned back in his chair, trying to look relaxed, but the stiffness in his posture gave him away. He had built his entire identity on control, on being the smartest person in the room, on always having the final word. And now, in front of international investors and his own business partner, he had placed a $100,000 bet on a woman he had insulted just minutes earlier. Robert Mitchell looked far less convinced. He had worked with William long enough to recognize the pattern. Whenever William felt challenged, he didn't step back, he pushed forward harder, even when logic suggested he should stop. Robert glanced briefly at Vanessa. She was standing calmly beside the table, hands resting lightly near her cleaning cart, as if the entire situation had nothing to do with her personal dignity or future. That calmness unsettled him more than anything else. Mr. Kang finally spoke, his tone polite but firm. "If we are doing this," he said carefully, "it should be fair." William nodded immediately. "Of course it will be fair," he replied. "We bring in a certified professional, live test, no tricks, no preparation time." Vanessa gently shook her head. "I'm ready," she said quietly, no hesitation. No fear, just certainty. William smiled again, thinner, sharper. "Good," he said. "Then let's begin." A staff member from the lounge was quickly called over. Within minutes, a private video call was set up on a large screen near the service counter. The screen flickered once, then came to life, revealing a professional office setting, bookshelves lined with documents, diplomas on the wall. A serious-looking woman in her 50s adjusted her glasses and looked directly into the camera. "Dr. Helen Park," she introduced herself, "certified interpreter, court and international trade specialization." William straightened slightly. "This will do," he said. Dr. Park listened carefully as William explained the situation. When he finished, she nodded once. "We will proceed with a standard evaluation," she said. 3 sections: legal, medical, and cultural interpretation. This is the same level used for professional certification assessments. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat. This was no longer a game. This was official. "Dr. Park looked directly at Vanessa through the screen. "Are you ready?" she asked. Vanessa didn't look away. "Yes," she replied. The first document appeared on screen, dense legal language. Complicated structure, clauses layered within clauses. Dr. Park began reading slowly in Korean, precise, controlled, formal. The kind of language used in international agreements where a single mistranslation could cost millions. Vanessa closed her eyes for a brief moment, not in hesitation, in focus. Then she began translating. Her voice changed slightly, adapting to the formal register, but remained steady throughout. She broke the sentence structure cleanly. translated each clause with accuracy, and explained legal implications without rushing. There was no panic in her delivery, no visible effort, just a smooth flow of understanding that made even complex legal terminology sound structured and clear. Mr. Kang leaned forward slightly. Robert stopped moving completely. William stared without blinking. Dr. Park continued listening. After several minutes, she stopped. A pause, a long one, then she spoke carefully. "Accurate," she said. "No errors detected in legal equivalence." The words landed quietly but heavily. William adjusted his collar. "This is just the first section," he said quickly. "Doctor." Park moved to the next document. Medical terminology this time, more complex, more specialized. She began reading again. Vanessa listened carefully. This time, there was a small pause in her expression. A moment where the language became extremely technical. A rare term appeared. One even native speakers sometimes struggled with. The room tightened slightly. William noticed. A faint smile returned. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for, but Vanessa didn't panic. Instead, she broke the term down slowly, analyzing structure, context, and root meaning. Then she reconstructed it in English with complete clarity, delivering a translation that not only matched the medical definition, but preserved its exact clinical precision. Dr. Park paused again. Her expression changed slightly, surprise, then respect. "Correct again," she said. The lounge grew quieter. Even the distant airport noise felt far away. William's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. Robert finally whispered under his breath. "She's not guessing." "Last section," Dr. Park said. Her tone shifted, more serious. "This one is cultural interpretation, classical context, very high difficulty." She began reading. The language changed, older phrasing, deeper meaning. Metaphorical structure that didn't translate directly into modern English or Korean without interpretation. Vanessa closed her eyes again, longer this time. The room waited. No one spoke. No one moved. Then Vanessa opened her eyes and began speaking. Not word-for-word translation, not literal conversion, but meaning, emotion, context. She rebuilt the message in English in a way that preserved its original depth, while making it fully understandable. It wasn't just translation anymore. It was interpretation at the highest level. When she finished, there was absolute silence. Dr. Park removed her glasses slowly. "In 20 years of certification testing," she said carefully, "I have rarely seen this level of natural fluency without formal academic training." She paused, then added one final line. "She is not just fluent. She is instinctive." The words stayed in the air, heavy, final. William didn't respond immediately. For the first time that night, he had no quick reaction prepared. No joke, no dismissal, no comeback, just silence. And in that silence, the entire balance of the room began to shift. The silence that followed Dr. Park's final words was not the kind that comes from confusion, but the kind that settles when something undeniable has just taken place in front of witnesses who can no longer interpret it any other way. William Harrison remained seated, but for the first time since the evening began, he no longer looked like a man who controlled the space around him. He looked like someone trying to understand how control had quietly slipped away without him noticing the exact moment it happened. Robert Mitchell had stopped pretending to be comfortable. Mr. Kang, on the other hand, remained composed, but his expression had changed in a way that was subtle yet unmistakable. Respect had replaced curiosity. Not the polite respect given out of obligation, but the kind reserved for people who had just revealed a truth that could not be ignored. William finally cleared his throat, a sound that felt too loud in the stillness. "This doesn't prove anything," he said, but even he could hear the weakness in his own words. "It's just interpretation under pressure, not real-world business execution." No one responded, not because they agreed, but because the statement no longer carried weight in the room. Vanessa stood quietly beside the table, her posture unchanged, her expression calm in a way that was beginning to unsettle William more than any verbal challenge ever could. She had not raised her voice once that entire evening, had not argued, had not tried to prove superiority, yet somehow every attempt to diminish her had only made the contrast clearer. "Mr. Kang finally spoke, addressing William directly, polite in tone, but firm in a way that did not invite contradiction. "Mr. Harrison," he said slowly, What we are seeing here is not performance. It is understanding. There is a difference. William forced a small smile. Understanding doesn't close deals, he replied. Execution does. Robert exhaled quietly as if exhausted by where the conversation was heading. He leaned slightly toward William. Stop, he said under his breath. This is not going your way anymore. But William didn't listen. There was a certain kind of pride that didn't retreat gracefully, especially when it had been challenged publicly. Instead of stepping back, he leaned further in. You know what I think, William said louder now, addressing the table. I think this entire situation has been exaggerated. She works here. She hears conversations. She picks up phrases. That's all this is. A few seconds passed. No one agreed. No one supported him. Because everyone in that room understood that what they had witnessed was far beyond casual exposure to language. It was structural understanding, cultural awareness, and technical precision, combined in a way that could not be explained away with convenience or coincidence. Vanessa finally looked at William again, and for the first time since the evening began, there was something quietly different in her expression. You didn't lose this because I speak another language, she said calmly. You lost this because you never listened to what was being said in the language you already understand. The words landed without force, but with precision. William didn't respond immediately. And in that pause, something subtle shifted again in the room. The energy that had been held tightly by confrontation and ego began to loosen, replaced by a kind of collective awareness that the dynamic had permanently changed. Mr. Kang slowly leaned back in his chair, studying both of them. Business is built on clarity, he said. Not assumptions. Then, after a brief pause, he added something that changed the direction of the entire evening. I believe we have seen enough. William looked up sharply. What does that mean? Mr. Kang exchanged a brief glance with his associates, a silent communication that required no explanation among them. Then he turned back toward Vanessa. You have something rare, he said simply. Not just skill, awareness, that cannot be taught easily. William sat still, finally realizing that the conversation was no longer under his control. And perhaps had not been for some time, and for the first time that night, he did not interrupt. The atmosphere inside the executive lounge had shifted so completely that it no longer resembled the same room where William Harrison had first thrown a $20 bill on the floor. What had begun as a display of arrogance had slowly transformed into something far more uncomfortable for him. A public reassessment of power, intelligence, and respect that no amount of money or influence could instantly reverse. William was still trying to recover control of a situation that had already moved beyond him. His posture remained rigid, but the confidence that usually defined him had begun to fracture in small, almost invisible ways. The slight delay before he spoke, the unnecessary tightening of his jaw, the way his gaze avoided Vanessa for more than a second at a time. These were not obvious signs of defeat, but they were enough for someone like Robert Mitchell to notice. Mr. Kang leaned forward, his hands resting calmly on the table. Mr. Harrison, he said, there is something you should understand about what we have witnessed tonight. William looked at him immediately, grateful for the shift in focus. Yes, he replied quickly. Of course, Mr. Kang paused, choosing his words with care. In our culture, he continued, competence is not only measured by formal position or appearance. It is measured by clarity under pressure, and by understanding what others do not immediately see. Vanessa stood quietly beside the table, still not inserting herself into the negotiation, still not reacting emotionally. She had stopped trying to interpret William's behavior long ago. Men like him were not new to her. What was new was the way the room itself had begun to shift its attention away from him. Robert finally spoke carefully. Mr. Kang, I think what we're trying to say is... But Mr. Kang raised his hand slightly, not rudely, but firmly enough to stop him mid-sentence. I am not finished, he said politely. Robert immediately fell silent. Mr. Kang turned toward Vanessa now, and when he spoke again, his tone was more deliberate. Miss Carter, he said, using her name for the first time, what you demonstrated here is not common. It is not something that appears by accident. It requires depth and discipline. And time? Vanessa lowered her eyes slightly in acknowledgement but remained silent. William shifted in his seat again. I appreciate the compliment, he interrupted, forcing politeness into his voice. But I think we are forgetting something important. She works at an airport lounge. That is her job. We are discussing international infrastructure investment. These are not the same level of responsibility. The words sounded confident, but the timing was off. Even Robert glanced at him with a look that suggested caution. Mr. Kang turned slowly toward him. That assumption, he said calmly, is exactly why many deals fail before they begin. William blinked. I don't understand, he replied. You are still evaluating people based on where they stand, Mr. Kang said, not what they understand. Tonight, that approach has already created more risk for your proposal than any clause in your contract. Vanessa finally spoke again, her voice soft but steady. I never intended to be part of your negotiation, she said. I was only doing my job. That simple sentence changed the emotional direction of the room more than anything else that night. Because it reminded everyone that the entire confrontation had not been initiated by her. She had not asked for attention or validation or recognition. She had simply responded when challenged. Robert leaned toward William again. This is slipping, he said quietly. We need to reset this conversation. But William was no longer listening properly. Something inside him was resisting, not because he didn't understand what was happening, but because understanding it meant accepting a version of reality he had never prepared for. Mr. Kang spoke again, his tone conclusive. I will be honest with you, he said. This evening has shown us something important about your environment. William looked up sharply. What exactly are you saying? Mr. Kang paused briefly. I am saying, he replied, that we need to reconsider the structure of this engagement before proceeding further. The words landed heavily. Robert closed his eyes for a second. William did not respond immediately. For the first time, he did not have a quick answer prepared. And in that silence, the balance of the entire room shifted one more time, not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. The meeting did not end with a dramatic announcement, nor did anyone stand up immediately to leave. Instead, it dissolved in a way that felt almost unnatural, as if the structure that had held the evening together had quietly loosened its grip and allowed itself to fall apart without resistance. Mr. Kang closed his folder completely. One of his associates adjusted his notes. Another checked a tablet briefly. Within seconds, the entire delegation had shifted from evaluation mode into exit mode, without a single additional word being exchanged about the deal itself. William Harrison remained seated for a few seconds longer than necessary. The room was no longer responding to him, yet his body still carried the posture of someone expecting response. Robert Mitchell had already begun gathering his things quietly, avoiding unnecessary movement, as if trying not to disturb a situation that had already reached its conclusion. Mr. Kang stood first. Slowly, calmly, not because he was leaving in disappointment, but because the structure of engagement had naturally completed its cycle. Before turning toward the exit, he paused and looked at Vanessa one last time. There is something important you should understand, he said gently. Vanessa met his gaze without speaking. He continued, people will often underestimate clarity when it arrives in an unexpected form. But clarity itself does not need permission to be recognized. The sentence lingered in the air longer than anything else had that night. Then he gave a small, respectful nod, not toward William, not toward the table, but toward Vanessa, and turned away. The delegation walked out. No final remarks, no handshake. No formal closing statement, just departure. And that absence of ceremony made the meaning of it even clearer. For a few seconds after they left, the lounge felt unusually still. The space that had been filled with negotiation, tension, and shifting power dynamics now felt like it was remembering what it had been before all of that happened. William finally exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. He looked toward the empty space where Mr. Kang had been sitting, then briefly toward Vanessa, then away again. There was no statement he could make that would reset the tone of the evening. Robert stepped closer to him. We should go, Robert said quietly. William didn't respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the table, not on anything specific, but on the absence of what had just happened. Deals did not usually end like this for him. This one felt different. It felt like something had been measured about him rather than the deal. Finally, he stood, Not decisively, but not weakly either, something in between. He adjusted his jacket, a small, habitual correction that had nothing left to fix, and looked briefly at Vanessa. For a second, it seemed like he might say something, but no words formed. Whatever he had intended to say no longer fit the room he was standing in, so he didn't speak. He simply turned and walked toward the exit. Robert followed. The sound of their footsteps faded quickly into the corridor outside, and then the lounge was left with only Vanessa. For a moment, she didn't move. The space around her felt unchanged physically, but completely different in meaning. The table still held glasses and documents and untouched items from earlier, yet nothing about it carried the same weight anymore. A staff member from the lounge slowly approached, unsure whether to speak or simply wait for instruction. Vanessa looked at him briefly, then gave a small nod that signaled understanding without needing words. The staff member quietly stepped back. Vanessa finally exhaled, not in relief, not in victory, but in release. And as she turned slightly toward the exit, the last trace of the evening's tension began to fade behind her, not because it had been resolved, but because it had already changed something that could not be undone. The corridor outside the executive lounge felt colder than it should have, as if the building itself had shifted its temperature to match the emotional weight of what had just ended. William walked a few steps ahead, his pace controlled but noticeably faster than usual, the kind of pace that tries to outrun thought rather than match it. Robert followed a short distance behind, saying nothing at first. He understood that the first words spoken after a moment like that rarely helped. Finally, Robert spoke. "William," he said carefully. "That didn't go the way you expected." William didn't stop walking. "It was one interpretation test," he replied flatly. "It wasn't just that," Robert said. "She was prepared," William replied. "That's all it is, preparation and exposure." Robert shook his head slowly. "No, it was more than preparation. You saw the room. You saw how they reacted." William finally stopped near a glass wall overlooking the terminal below. People moved in patterns that looked orderly from a distance, but chaotic up close. He stared at them for a moment without focusing on any one person. "What exactly are you trying to say?" he asked, less confrontational now, more fatigued. Robert stepped closer. "I'm saying you didn't lose control because of a mistake," he said quietly. "You lost it because the assumptions you were using stopped working in real time." William didn't respond immediately. His jaw tightened slightly, but this time it wasn't anger. It was something more internal, resistance to reinterpreting what had already been seen by too many people to ignore. Behind them, the glass doors of the lounge opened again. Vanessa stepped out, still in the same uniform, still carrying the same quiet posture. She walked at a steady pace, neither rushing nor lingering. For a brief moment, her eyes met Robert's. There was no expression of triumph, no attempt to communicate superiority. Only calm acknowledgement. Then she looked away and continued walking. William noticed her presence but did not turn fully. He kept his gaze forward. Robert watched her pass. "She didn't need to prove anything," he said quietly, more to himself than to William. William finally exhaled, longer this time. "Everyone proves something when money is involved," he said, though the conviction behind it had weakened significantly. A few seconds passed, then Robert spoke again. "What happens next depends on what you choose to take from this." William glanced at him briefly. "I don't need lessons," he replied, but without the force he would have used earlier. Robert nodded once. "I'm not giving you one," he said. "I'm just telling you what I saw." Another pause, longer, more reflective. William turned slightly toward the glass again, watching a plane taxi slowly across the runway in the distance. Everything outside continued moving forward with certainty, while he stood in a moment that no longer felt certain at all. And somewhere behind him, Vanessa had already disappeared into the flow of passengers, blending back into the environment that had once defined her role, but no longer defined her presence. William Harrison stood for a moment near the exit of the terminal, watching the flow of people move past him like nothing had changed in the world. But for him, something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't the loss of a negotiation, or the failure of a challenge, or even the embarrassment of being corrected in front of others. It was the realization that confidence built only on assumption collapses instantly when it meets someone who doesn't fit those assumptions at all. Robert adjusted his coat and looked at him once, not with judgment, but with quiet understanding. "You'll recover from this," Robert said. William didn't respond immediately. Then after a long pause, he nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly, "but not the same way." That was the first honest sentence he had spoken all evening. Elsewhere in the terminal, Vanessa continued walking toward the exit gates. She no longer felt urgency tied to other people's timelines. The world that had once measured her in small assumptions had, for one evening, been forced to pause and recalibrate. But she knew better than to believe a single moment defines a life. Outside the airport, the air was cooler. She stopped for a second, looking at the distant lights of the city, not as someone who had won a confrontation, but as someone who had quietly outgrown the space where that confrontation mattered. The night did not feel like an ending to her. It felt like a beginning that had finally been acknowledged. And maybe that is the real lesson hidden inside this story. Not that talent speaks louder than status, but that talent often exists quietly in places people stop looking. In uniforms, in service roles, in overlooked conversations, in people who were never asked what they know, because the truth is simple. The world is not short of extraordinary people. It is only short of people willing to notice them. If this story made you think differently about the people around you, then don't scroll away just yet. Comment below and tell me, have you ever been underestimated like this? Or have you seen someone who surprised everyone with their hidden talent? I read every comment, and your story might inspire the next video. If you enjoyed this, like the video, subscribe for more emotional storytelling, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because you never know, the person you ignore today might be the one the world talks about tomorrow.